qualitative study, one of the things that we found is the families said to us when we interviewed them, I was really surprised that they were able to help me and that they were open to helping me, because a lot of these families, honestly, frankly, they had negative experiences with social services, and now all of a sudden they had somebody that really seemed to be reaching out and really wanting to help them, and they were surprised by it. They were like, wow, I can't believe somebody really wants to help me that much. And I think that could have a big impact. But see, this is a kind of effect where you think about this, we'll probably never be able to measure this, but what if when this mom's kid turns 14 and she needs help for the 14-year-old, and she's had a positive experience with being able to utilize social services, she gets the help she needs for her 14-year-old. I mean, how cool would that be? But you can see we're never going to be able to go out 14 years and discover whether or not that's really true. And then, then this is a summary. So this is for you, Suzanne. When we looked at the Healthy Families Parenting Inventory, we found pretty good results for many of the subscales: problem solving, mobilizing resources, parent-child behavior, home environment, almost parenting efficacy. And so what we were able to document is that the inventory is able to show change. Now, I don't have the slide in here. I don't think, let me see, no. But we had used subscales from the Adolescent Adult Parenting Inventory, which is a very widely used instrument for measuring outcomes. None of those results showed any difference between the two groups, and the reliability was terrible when we looked at it. And I think that measure, maybe like a lot of measures, just measuring really complicated psychological processes, whereas the measures that we showed the best results on, they just seem really clear and direct and easy to interpret. So you take a measure like Adolescent Adult Parenting Inventory that's a little complicated psychologically, you give it to our families, some of which do not have great literacy, many of which we have to deal with translation, so now you're translating English to Spanish, and then all of that just adds a lot of error to the group and makes it a little bit harder to show results. So I think this is a good validation of that HFPI. We're really actually able to show some gain scores that really made a difference. But what didn't show significance? Depression did not show any significance. So it's interesting. It's hard to know. It may be that you need a lot more participants with higher rates of depression to show an impact there. Emotional loneliness, immunizations, well baby checks, corporal punishment, and then again the AAPI parenting subscales didn't show a difference. So that's why it was important for us to actually look at a large number of outcomes so we could capture different things. We did look at a dose response effect. So this was an interesting thing that we wanted to do for GGK, and what we're trying to look at here is a little complicated. We were trying to look and see, well, do the families that get the most Healthy Families home visits, do they, at 6 and 12 months, do they show the best results? Is there a relationship between the dosage of Healthy Families and the outcomes of Healthy Families? And we found actually some significant relationships on the HOPE scale, which is kind of measuring future orientation and goals, in problem solving, in social support. So their social support did come up, interestingly enough. Depression, breastfeeding, and the mental health index. So we kind of felt like this was a reasonable test of the curriculum because we felt like if you were getting more dosage of the program, you were getting more of the GGK curriculum. And we felt like then we were a little bit closer to being able to establish some of the impact of the curriculum and how it might be helping these families. This is a tough test. I actually didn't think we'd find anything. So it's hard. And some things, it seems logical to think about how, well, the more visits you get, the better you get, but that's not as logical as you might imagine. So for example, in psychotherapy research, lots of times once people enter into treatment, they mobilize their own resources quite quickly, and you can find actually some pretty good outcomes quickly. And then other people need to sustain their efforts over time. So I think it's kind of an interesting question still, when do families really get the benefits that they need from this program? Because maybe you come in Healthy Families get them organized, get them thinking about parenting, and maybe that sets them off onto the trajectory that they just really need. It's like somebody just to really get them set up, and then they'll do much better. So this was an interesting test. Yes?
Sorry, I keep asking.
That's okay.
But is there any explanation that you have for the dose response effect with the Going Great kids on social support and depression, and yet there wasn't a significant finding in the overall outcomes in those two, which I think is real interesting.
So I'm going to actually pop in. This goes back to that intent to treat.
Okay.
So even the people who, as he mentioned, got one visit and dropped out, they're still included in the full analysis.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
That's where the dose response really makes a lot more sense to look at.
Yes, thank you. So there you do get, she's not there. I was gonna say there she gets her social support. Good question.
Okay, so then we got lucky. As fortune would have it, I was on my couch reading a book one day, and a book on the secret life of pronouns. I'm sure all of you have read this book. And you know, it was just really fascinating book. This professor at the University of Texas at Austin, was studying language in a way that hadn't been studied before. And I thought, I wonder if I could study change that way. And he says the words people generate are like fingerprints. And he's been able to document that how you use words is way more revealing than you would ever possibly imagine. So, and you can see, this is easy to study because you can find people's words easily. So he did, for example, he did a study where he could look at depressed and non-depressed people and see that their words really differed. He did a study where he looked at the poems that Sylvia Plath wrote and could see that she was closer and closer to serious levels of depression and suicide. He's been studying expressive writing, so he was studying trauma and trying to think about how people resolve their personal trauma. And what he found is there was a relationship between people being able to resolve their trauma and how they talked about it and what they said, what words they used. He even showed a difference in speeches that people gave before and after really significant personal and emotional events in their lives. So very, very interesting, really intriguing stuff. So we did a qualitative and linguistic analysis because we had some qualitative data. And we compared the treatment and control group looking at how parents express words to describe parenting and their children. And the participants were asked to describe their children and to talk about what they've discovered about their child. So it's kind of an open thing, like tell us about your parenting, tell us about your baby. And they just got to choose the words, and then we recorded those words. And what we hypothesized here is that they would be different. The treatment group might be more present and future-oriented, talk less about the past, use more first-person pronouns, talk in more positive emotional terms, less in negative emotional terms, show less anxiety, demonstrate greater cognitive mechanisms like insight, understanding cause, expressing certainty and confidence. And we found some really big differences. So here, they talk less about the present, they talk more about less about the past, more about the present, more affective, more positive, less negative, less sadness, more perceptual processes, more feeling expression, more cognitive mechanism, more insight, more cause, more certainty. So it was interesting. And maybe, you know, in just trying to think about this, and Michelle's going to talk a little bit more about this when she gets to the implementation, but when you think about it, I mean, part of the job of the home visitor is really to kind of help reframe how parents think about parenting, how they interact with their babies, how they, you know, that whole bonding and emotional experience that they go through maybe changes how they think and what they say. And maybe we were able to capture this by looking at the words that they use. So this is I think this is a really fascinating twist to the study. And we have, what's really cool about this is you think about, we've got these outcome measures, which measure one kind of science, and now we have a whole different kind of way of trying to think about the impact that we've had in more of a linguistic fashion. So we have both of those things suggesting that healthy families is changing the way that parents parent and the impact that might have on their children. So we found positive outcomes across a number of different outcome categories. That was cool. And the big conclusions were parenting in the home environment. That seemed to show some of the best results. Not surprising, right? We emphasize that a lot. So that was good. Just one comment about the safety practices. So I think this is important. I try to emphasize this because unintentional injuries are the leading cause of death for children, unintentional injuries. So if the home visitors can go into the home and make sure that the home is a safe environment, they can create really important outcomes, right? And it's hard to capture these outcomes in terms of death because we know there's not a lot of unintentional deaths, but there's more than there should be, and home visitors could play a really big role because a lot of these families have not had the experience or the home environment to really manage safety as well as they could. So working with your home visitors to manage safety is just really critical, I think. Really important. In terms of mental health, kind of a little bit less consistent, although I love the fact that we got the mental health index, we got the positive outcomes there. I think some people have really raised many questions about depression and how we impact depression. We didn't see that. We're still trying to unpack that a little bit. The problem-solving measure, I thought that was good. When I was talking to Cheryl at GGK, I think she felt like the curriculum does try to work a lot with families on how to problem solve, and she was excited about that as a significant outcome. She thought that reflected the kinds of things the curriculum emphasizes. In terms of health outcomes, the breastfeeding is important. It may add to long-term health benefits. Contraception could reap bigger long-term impacts. Immunizations, like I said, showed no difference. We'll see what happens at 1 year. Use of resources, that was good. The finding of goal setting suggested the Healthy Families mothers may set goals and pursue more opportunities, so that's kind of a nice indirect measure. So pretty good outcomes overall, better than I expected. Not that I don't expect a lot from you all, I do, but I think our job is hard trying to figure out how to get measures to capture what you do and, and really show that there's some difference there. And again, just to remind you, this study is still was very limited because we had such small numbers. If we had bigger numbers, I mean, we would maybe be looking at even bigger impacts across even more of the outcome measures. In context, I think that this study, but maybe I'm probably biased, so take this with a grain of salt. I think that this study, in the context of other home visitation studies,